Thank you so much for joining us in here today. So many great speakers, so many great talks we have lined up over the next 2 days. Very excited to have you with us. So today we're going to be talking about great APIs, and specifically we're going to be talking about them from the lens of Lego, which is really fun. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with a story. So let's rewind for a second to December of 2020. 2020 was a strange year. I don't think I need to say much more than that. And so around the holidays, I think a lot of people's holiday plans got thrown into quite a pickle. So for my family, we tried to get together actually on Christmas outside. And for those of you who are in Georgia, I don't know if you remember, but this was the day where it dropped like 10 degrees and there were 15-mile-an-hour winds. And for Georgia, it was very chilly that day. Of course, we're all like huddled in a garage with space heaters and everything. So we tried. But one thing that we do every Christmas is we do a Secret Santa. So I am the oldest of 4, and 3 of us have significant others. So there's about 7 people. There's exactly 7 people in like my generation of my side of the family. And so what we started doing really about a decade ago was doing Secret Santa. Instead of like each family unit having to get things for each other family unit, we just said, we'll just put names in a hat, pick them out, and buy each other gifts. It's a little more complicated. My mom actually like handles distributing everybody so you don't get the same person year after year. It's a whole thing. We love it. So in 2020, we were still able to do that. We still were able to give our gifts, and people took them home and unwrapped them. And it just so happened that year, my sister, the one just below me, got me a Lego set. And let me set some context for a second. Some of you may resonate with this. Lego was a gigantic part of my childhood, as was Star Wars. So a Star Wars Lego set was like right there in the sweet spot. Now, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, so most of the Legos I had were like secondhand, just like vats of Legos. It wasn't real sets with the manuals that you get to put together. It was just a big old bucket, and I could do whatever I wanted with, which in retrospect was still great, right? I could make ships, I could make castles, I could make Star Wars things just out of my brain. It was absolutely fantastic, and I think my parents still have a bucket of Lego for the next generation of grandkids. So when I received this as a gift, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I haven't put together a Lego set. I haven't touched Lego in, I don't know, like 15 years. And it was as fantastic as I thought it was going to be. So naturally, whenever we do something and we need to have it cataloged, we tweet about it. So I tweeted about having this gift, and I took a few days to put it together. We had a 1-year-old at the time, so we were working around his schedule, and we were first-time parents, so just getting used to having a kid. So when he was napping and things, just over a few days, I slowly put it together, tweeted out some updates as I went, was having a great time. So finally got it all completed, and I sat back and I was just going, this was fun. It was just great. It was such an enjoyable experience. And I paused and I really started thinking about it. I looked to my wife and I said, there's a conference talk in here somewhere. I don't know what it is yet, but there's something about this that was just so good. I need to sit with this. So I did for a little bit, and I thought through, what did Lego do that was so great? What were the things that they were able to do that other people may not do as well? And then slowly over time, it eventually hit me like a ton of bricks. Ha ha ha. Or I don't know if this comes through, that's actually a Lego picture. It turned out that they weren't doing anything revolutionary. They weren't doing anything advanced. What they were doing is they were executing on the fundamentals perfectly. And so what we're going to talk about is what some of those fundamentals are and how they affect how we write code. So as we're talking about the fundamentals, one of the things I want to talk about is, I don't know if you've ever heard the term, the aggregation of marginal gains. This is something I like to come back to even in my personal life when I'm thinking about making changes. The idea behind the aggregation of marginal changes is that you can affect huge amounts of change by making lots of very small changes over time. It kind of frees us of this responsibility, or this weight rather, of needing to make these huge changes all at once. Instead, we can just focus on making small changes consistently, and over time, the aggregation of those changes brings about a huge difference. You can also use a sports analogy here, right? You talk about some of the elite teams out there, and what you typically will hear people say is that they get the fundamentals perfectly. They execute on them perfectly, better than anyone else. And by executing on those fundamentals, it opens up all sorts of opportunities for them elsewhere. So as we're going through this, we're going to talk about some fundamentals that Lego does better than anybody else. Before we jump into that, though, let me go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Gesualdo. I'm here, lived here in Atlanta most of my life, bounced around a few other places as a younger adult, but mostly here in the metro Atlanta area. I've been married for 12 years. My wife and I have 2 kids. My son just turned 3, and my daughter turns 1 next month. So it's a great time at the Gesualdo household. Lots of controlled chaos. I love anything with a good narrative, music, movies, Doctor Who, the T-shirt I'm wearing right now. So great. If there's any Whovians in here, we can talk about that afterwards. Been working as a software engineer for 8 years, but I like to say I was working in web-adjacent tech for 17. So I've been doing a variety of jobs, started in the e-learning industry, was doing some back-end implementations of learning management systems, jumped over to front-end engineering. I've done full-stack work and done a variety of roles over the years. Right now, one of my passions is really in developer experience, tooling, and enablement. As I've progressed in my career, that's an area where my passion has really grown. Which leads, well, actually, I'll put this in here too. If you want to connect with me online, I'm Ray Gesualdo everywhere, Twitter, GitHub, raygesualdo.com. So if you want to connect and talk about this or talk about anything else at all, feel free to do so. But my passion for developer experience, for tooling, for enablement plays into my day job. So I work at SalesLoft. SalesLoft is an Atlanta-based company. We're the leading sales engagement platform provider in the world. And there I serve as a staff software architect focusing primarily on front-end enablement. Do a few other things as well, but there I'm focused on front-end enablement. And so the questions around how do people use what we build? How do people interact with the code that we write? Those are constantly rolling through my brain. So you can probably guess where a lot of this Lego talk came from. So how do we set others up for success is a lot of what we're asking on the enablement team that I'm on, right? The software that we write, the tooling that we write, even the flows that we put together for people. How do we set people up for success? Which plays into what we're going to be talking about today. So again, back to our Lego. So let's talk for a second about APIs. Let's qualify what I mean by API. So an API could mean a web API, right? Think about one of probably the more famous API-driven companies is Stripe, right? They've got this huge API for doing all sorts of payment processing. That is a type of API, but we're going to think about it in more generic terms, in a larger umbrella of terms. And so an API could be a large web API like Stripe's, but it could also be something as simple as I'm writing some code that I need to hand off to another team, right? What does that handoff process look like? How does that other team use what I've written? So this spectrum of APIs is actually very broad. And so as we're talking through today, what we're going to be talking through applies all along the spectrum. Now, it may apply in different ways, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through, but know that it applies to that entire spectrum. And as we're going through this discussion too, one thing I want us to do is think about our APIs in terms of a product. So I'm going to use the term customers as we go through here. I don't necessarily mean paying customers at whatever job you work at. What I mean is the consumers of your API. And again, if you're working maybe on an internal product or an internal library that's used by other developers at your company, your customers are your fellow developers in that case, right? If you're Stripe, your customers are literally your paying customers. So when I say customers here, I'm just talking about the people who use our APIs. So as we go through these principles, we said that there's going to be a spectrum of different APIs that this is going to cover. The level of effort that we put into each of these fundamentals that we're going to talk about changes too, right? If you're building a small component or component library to hand off to a few other teams, the level of effort you go through in planning and executing on that looks different than if you're building the next Stripe, right? We understand that, right? So the level of effort is going to change relative to the size and breadth and impact of the API. So as we're going through this, another thing I want us to think through is these 5 fundamentals. This shouldn't suddenly be a huge weight now of additional things we have to do as we're building APIs, right? The idea behind these fundamentals is that we start executing them on a more consistent and a more successful way, that we build up those muscles so it becomes part and parcel of how we build what we build. When you kind of try to bolt these fundamentals on at the end, I won't say what they are yet, but when you bolt fundamental A and fundamental B on at the end, then it feels like a whole lot more work. But if we're practicing these as we're going through the process, then it becomes truly a part of the process. So let's go ahead. We're going to look at 5 today. And again, all of these derived from my experience building with Lego. So let's go ahead and talk about the first one, documentation. And I think every picture from here on out is all just little Lego pieces. So we're going to have a lot of fun. So documentation, and again, depending on the size of your API and what kind of API it is, what your actual documentation looks like is going to differ. But some of the ways that we can write APIs will remain the same. So what did Lego do that was just so great? I've got a few things. One, they were extremely clear. Extremely clear. So I don't know if you've ever cracked open some documentation for maybe an interesting open source library that you're interested in implementing, and you get in there and the instructions are confusing. Like, you don't know where to start, you don't know where to end, you don't really know what to do in the middle. Clarity in our documentation is one of the fundamental pieces that we need to have in place in order to support and provide a successful experience to our customers. With that, one of the things that Lego did just phenomenally well was step-by-step instructions. So again, let's go back to our example of that great open source project that you're so excited to use, you're ready to get going with it, and it's got 4 steps to get started. You do step 1, and it works. You do step 2, and it works. You do step 3, and it works. You're so excited, and then you go to do step 4, and then it just breaks. You're like, wait a second, what do I have to do? So through a series of troubleshooting, you realize, well, there was actually a step 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D, and then you can get to step 4. That lack or those missing steps in there is a great way to destroy your documentation. Having those step-by-step definitions or step-by-step directions is what helps ease people or bring people into whatever it is that you're providing for them, that product that you're building. Now, not every bit of documentation is step-by-step. There's lots of different ways that we can write documentation, a lot of different types of documentation. But step-by-step instructions, where appropriate, we want to make sure that we are being complete with our step-by-step instructions, and we're being extremely clear with how we describe things. Lego instructions are also multimodal, and what I mean by that is, I'm a boomer at heart, I guess, so I like the physical, the actual physical paper. I'm not a boomer at heart, but I do like the physical paper manual, right? So I'm flipping through the pages, and I just like the feel of it. I like physical books too. It's just the way I am. But I was told after the fact by someone who does a lot more Lego sets than I do that Lego has a mobile app you can download. It's got all the manuals in there. I think there was a rumor of you can see like a 3D model of whatever set that you're putting together and blow it up and stuff, which I didn't do, but sounds really cool. I might have to check that out the next time I do a Lego set. But the point is, what Lego did was that they created documentation that was multimodal. It met users or customers where they were at. Now let's take that to what we're talking about, right? I'm not suggesting you have to create a mobile app with documentation for the developers who are going to be using your 2-component package, all right, that you're distributing. But where can they find your documentation, right? If it's a large enough project, maybe there is a documentation site, right, that they can go to read some of these things. Can they find some documentation in the repo? If, depending on the language, is there significant documentation in the code editor as they're going through and building with it, right? That's such a powerful tool to give people just-in-time documentation in their code editor. So this idea of multimodal, meeting customers where they're at with our documentation, is important, something that Lego does really well. And then lastly, and this is a smaller one, but one thing that I noticed about their documentation is that it's highly referential. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the very first page of the manual, they've got all the pieces, they've got all the serial numbers, and you can go onto their site, you can search for those serial numbers, you can find those pieces, you can buy more of those pieces, you can find whether sets use those pieces, and it's all very self-reinforcing. once you know that serial number, you can find it in lots of different places. They refer to it other places in the documentation as well. So let's take this to writing, let's say, a web API documentation site. Do we have consistent references to the different resources that we're using? Do we have consistent references to the endpoints, things of that nature? So documentation, that initial, how do people first get into our product, and then how do they use it over time? What is the documentation? What is the support materials we provide for them? Lego, it's clear. Their step-by-step instructions are truly step-by-step. It's multimodal, so it meets the users where they're at, and then it's highly referential, so you can find your way across different pieces and parts of the documentation. So the second fundamental that they get really right is composition. And I love this aspect of Lego, the fact that you can just use pieces for totally different reasons than they were ever created for. And we're gonna look at some screenshots in just a second of ways that Lego does this. But let's set the stage really quickly by defining this term, composability. Really what I'm talking about when I say composability is, how is this thing, this product, this API, this whatever, used in the context of other things? Another way we can say that is, how easily can I remix this thing into something new? And I'm not talking about the remixing where users take something and use it in a way it really shouldn't be used. Like, that happens, right? But I'm talking in terms of good faith actors, right? Where can we provide building blocks that people can reuse in novel ways, as opposed to like prefabricated puzzle pieces that can only fit together in a specific fashion. So let's talk about how Lego does this, because I just think this is so cool. So the Lego set that I was given, let me give you a little bit of background, because I'm a nerd about these things and I love it. The Lego set I was given is a Star Wars Lego set of an AT-ST Walker, which stands for All-Terrain Scout Transport. So if you've seen the original Star Wars films, this first popped up in Return of the Jedi on Endor. It's a little two-person armored transport that can go around and patrol the forest and patrol a variety of terrains. This is from the TV show The Mandalorian, and so this takes place after the fall of the Empire, so the AT-ST Walker is no longer as put together as it was, which is why you see the red and the brown. It's kind of been cobbled together by this group of raiders that use it to kind of keep control of their own little kingdom. And so there's more exposed wires than you would find on the older sets. All that to say, you've got some exposed wires here. So these exposed wires right there, connecting the legs to the body. If you were to take that piece out and look at it closely, that is the exact same piece that you would find in an Indiana Jones Lego set. It's his bullwhip. It's not like a piece of pipe or something like that. It's just the little bullwhip piece that Indiana Jones has, which I just thought was the coolest thing. I first cracked open the set and I was like, why is there like 2 or 3 bullwhips in here? This makes no sense. And then when I got to the step, I was like, I get it now. Up here up top on the roof hatch, those two vertical, or those two poles running the length of the hatch, those you would find in like a medieval knight set. They'd use them for jousting or for holding their flags up. But then there are also struts on this roof hatch. And then the one that really blew my mind, you can't really see the picture. I wish I could zoom in enough for y'all to be able to see this, or that the model would last long enough for me to bring it in here, but it'll all fall apart. So that little black panel in the back, that's where the engine's supposed to be. So as engines do, they have a grill sitting on top with some patterns and a little bit of texture. And so when I was fitting all the pieces in, I got to two paint rollers, 2 little paint rollers like you'd find in a little house set. And you just like clipped them in and set them down. And there you go. You had it. You had your engine grill. I was just like, okay, that's so cool. That's so cool. How Lego reuses these things is great. Which leads us to us providing reusable pieces and parts for our customers. And again, this will look different depending on what you're building. But the question comes back to, are we providing building blocks for people to use in ways that maybe we haven't imagined yet? Or are we creating prefabricated puzzle pieces that have to be used together in only a specific way? And if we can do the former, that unlocks a lot of productivity and a lot of potential for others to take what we've built and build even better things on top of it. The third fundamental that they get perfectly is consistency. Now, when you're in manufacturing, this is a lot easier to be consistent about, but the fact of the matter is that Lego works the same way everywhere. And so I showed this image before, and someone who had a background in manufacturing came up to me afterwards and was like, this is the worst schematic. Like, the way that they have all the measurements and everything is terrible. So if you have a background in manufacturing, you're twitching a little bit right now, I apologize, but this is the best picture I could find. So we're just gonna run with this one. But in terms of Lego's consistency, how does that apply to what we're talking about here? Well, let's think of a few different types of APIs and where consistency really is key, right? So if we go back to the web API example with Stripe, are your error codes consistent? Are your data payloads consistent? Does the resource that may be able to be accessed in 2 or 3 different places, does it always provide the same data set no matter where it's accessed from? If you're building, let's say, a design system, how are the props, what are the props, or what's the input and the output coming in and out of that system? Do they all follow the same naming convention? If you have some sort of styling overrides, do those work the same way? And do they work the same way everywhere? So regardless of the kinds of APIs we're working on, consistency is key. This is involved with naming, right? How do we name things? But it's also about how we build things. Do things operate in a consistent fashion, one to the next to the next? And the amazing thing about consistency too is that it also makes our product more valuable over time. Because if our product is consistent, then people know they can use it over and over, and they can continue to invest their knowledge in learning it because it will stay valuable to them in the long run. If you're if you're being highly inconsistent, then people are going to go, I've used them before, but I don't know if I'm going to use that thing again because I don't really know what to expect. As opposed to, I've used that thing before, and I know if I use it again, it's going to operate the same way, and I can continue to invest in using and learning that tool. So let's talk about number 4, compatibility. So this blew my mind. I had to look it up for this talk. The first Lego brick was released in 1958. So that was 64 years ago. The first Lego brick was released. And if we could somehow find that Lego brick, if it hasn't been melted down or is in some landfill somewhere, if we could find that Lego brick and take it back to my house, we could clip it on to that AT-ST walker. Because the backwards compatibility story with Lego is absolutely incredible. Legos that were made 60 years ago will work with Legos that are printed today. Now, I am not suggesting by any means that the software we are writing today needs to be backwards compatible in 60 years. It probably won't even be around in 60 years, right? We don't need that long of a window when we're talking about backwards compatibility. But when we talk about making changes, how we do this matters. And it feeds into that consistency a little bit, because we're going to have to make changes. We're going to have to break things as we go. But how are we going to do that? Are we going to do that in a consistent way, in an inconsistent way? Let's talk about some of that. So I won't say which one, but I was using an open source project about 3 years ago, and I was using it it was a personal project, but something that I needed to kind of keep up to date. And this tool went through a bit of churn over a series of like 9 to 12 months, where even for minor releases, every time I did an update, it felt like something was breaking. And I had to go and I had to fix the thing before I could do the thing that I actually wanted to work on. And arguments could be made that I didn't need to update all the time, or that I just needed to let it rest, but there were legitimate reasons why I needed to keep updating, right? That wasn't really an option. And I just got so frustrated that simple things like doing a minor version bump would break, and then I have to spend, especially on a personal project that I'm not getting paid for, it's like I gotta spend a few hours, go figure out why this thing's broken, and then go fix it before I can do the thing that I actually need to do. So after about 9 months of this, I was like, forget it. I dumped that tool, switched over to a new tool, and I never looked back. And the first tool has since gotten better, gotten more stable, but I don't think I'm ever gonna go back to it, just because that taste in my mouth of how difficult it was to work with, it stays with us. We get these developer intuitions over time. they're not always correct, right? First impressions aren't always correct. But we do start to develop some intuitions. We start to get a feel for what tools can I depend on and what tools I can't. What people can I depend on, what people I can't, right? That's just a part of how we go through life. And so having this backwards compatibility story combined with the consistency we were talking about a few minutes ago is very key, right? So please, 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 if you're following Semver, only break on major version bumps. Now, granted, the team that I'm on, we maintain our internal design system at SalesLoft. Every once in a while, something sneaks through in a minor that we didn't think was going to break anything. Mistakes are going to happen, right? But on the whole, we want to be very strict and very consistent about how we break things. If you're not following Semver, then follow something, right? Document it, follow it all the time, and make sure your customers are aware so that they know what the backwards compatibility story is with whatever it is you're building. And this builds trust. Again, going back to that idea of we build up this intuition of what we can use and what we can't, what we like, what we don't. If your backwards compatibility story is strong and you are consistently building and presenting value to your customers, they're going to trust not only what you build, but they're going to trust, by extension, you as a developer as well. So let's talk about the fifth. And this is the one that undergirds it all. And it might be a little surprising that we're ending with that the fifth one is this, but the fundamental that I think LEGO gets right is empathy. And what does empathy have to do with building great APIs? Well, building great APIs, we need to be thinking about the customer. We need to be thinking about the person on the other end. We used to be able to say sitting in the desk next to me, but it could be the person sitting across the Zoom screen from you or the Google Meet or whatever it is that you use. It could be someone halfway around the world, especially if you're doing something in a more globally distributed situation, a large company or an open source project. We don't know who the other person necessarily is going to be all the time. So we need to have empathy of understanding, okay, that's a human, they're trying to do a job, they're trying to deliver value in whatever it is that they're building. So when I build something and deliver it to someone else, I need to deliver it human to human, not computer to computer. APIs are for computers, right? But the things that we do as developers, the code that we write, the documentation that we write, the fact that we can be consistent, the fact that we can make sure that things don't break when we hand them off to other people, all of these concepts are about the human aspect of building APIs, far more than the technical. The first four are all technical in how we build great APIs, but this one is more of a posture. This is an attitude. How do we go about planning and executing what it is that we build? So again, LEGO, they got so many things right. They got documentation right. Their composability story is so much fun. Their consistency has been the same. Consistency and compatibility has been so strong for 64 years now. But what they really lead with is empathy, thinking through how is someone else going to experience this and how can I build it in such a way that they have a good experience. So what I want all of us to think through as we think through how LEGO applies to great APIs, as we think through how empathy plays a role in what we build for other people, what customer experience are you going to create for those that use what you build? Thank you, everybody. All right, we are done. I'll be down at the front if you want to come and talk about this or anything else. Other than that, have a great conference, everybody.